Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 of the Harvard Classics Lectures. We are now in lecture number 92 from the Harvard Classics Volume 26, Continental Drama. And we'll be looking now at Racine's Phaedra from 1677. Without doubt, one of the great French plays that borrows heavily from the classical tradition. Of course, Euripides' Hippolytus, we've already given lectures on it, learnstrong.net. Seneca's Phaedra as well is another source for this classic play. Now, Racine, we just gave a lecture on Corneille and Pollock. We'll now look at the second of those three that we call the Holy Trinity of great French 17th century writers. Molière's Tartuffe we'll look at in the lecture to follow. Born the 22nd of December 1639, dies the 21st of April 1699. Loves the French Alexandrian verse. Robert Lowell will even say about his language that it was quote unquote diamond-edged, and he talked about the glory of its hard electric edge. It's beautiful in the French, compelling in translation. Well, let's go ahead and review the play and then work with our Big Five and our Level 2 and 3 at the conclusion. Let's break our heart again, as we said when we worked with Euripides' Hippolytus. This is one of those really tragic plays, very much in the vein of Medea as well. The play is set at the royal court in Troezen on the Peloponnese coast in southern Greece, right? In the absence of her royal husband, Theseus, Phaedra ends by declaring her love to the son Hippolytus and Theseus' son from a previous marriage. Let's go through the acts quickly. Act 1. Theseus' 6-month absence will lead his son, Hippolytus, to tell his tutor that he's going to go ahead and leave and search for his father. We immediately think of Telemachus at the beginning of the Odyssey, going in search of Odysseus. However, the tutor, Thramentes, will kind of push on Hippolytus a little bit. And Hippolytus will reveal that the real motive is his forbidden love for Erica. Erica, the beautiful Erica, sole survivor of the royal house that will have been supplanted by Theseus, and is now, for Erica, under a vow of required chastity, obviously against her will. So you've got a very interesting dynamic. Daddy's been gone for 6 months. Son says that he's going to go ahead and go out searching for Daddy, but the real reason isn't that he longs to find his father. The real reason is because he's in love with a woman who his father has said no man will ever be with. Meanwhile, Theseus' wife, Phaedra, well, she's got just an intense, consuming love, but it is illicit, for her stepson Hippolytus. However, he doesn't know, and nobody else knows. We immediately think of Virgil's Aeneid, and of course Dido and her love for Aeneas, right? So she's wasting away. Quite literally, she is close to death. She's half demented. We think of Dido and the Aeneid. Of course, we've given lectures on these other titles at learnstrong.net, right? And then you have the old nurse. We're going to talk about the power of peer pressure in this play. The old nurse, Onon. She explains to Onon her state of mind on condition that after she tells what's going on, she be allowed to die rather than to face dishonor. The love of the stepson, Hippolytus, is obviously something which cannot be allowed. When all of a sudden, the death of Theseus is announced, right? And, of course, we've got a debate then about who will succeed to the throne. Onon, the nurse, will urge Phaedra that since her love for her stepson is now totally legit, why not go ahead and let him know, form an alliance with him, right? So that way the future can be beneficial to the infant son of Phaedra's own flesh. The second act will open with new hope. Erica will reveal to her maidservant Ismene she's in love with Hippolytus as well, who promptly appears, declares his love for her. One of the true tragedies of this play is that on so many levels things could work out so well and they don't, right? However, as they're talking, Hippolytus and Erica, who would show up but Phaedra, right? She will plead for the rights of her infant son, right? And will explain why she's been so cold towards Hippolytus. And then entering into what usually is called like a trance-like state, overcome with powerful emotion, she involuntarily will confess to Hippolytus her hidden passions, her love, and of course poor Hippolytus is just dumbstruck. He's like, my goodness, what is going on? She immediately senses that he is rejecting her. She thinks he's incapable of love. Of course, the audience knows it isn't that he's incapable of love, it's that he's in love with another woman. She will go out in a wild frenzy, and she asks for Hippolytus' sword so that she can end, right, her pain, her torture. In the meantime, we will have news brought to Hippolytus that, in fact, Theseus may still be alive, not dead after all. Act 3. Well, we've got Phaedra. She is clearly desperate. She sends word to Hippolytus. She invites him to share the crown of Athens. However, Onan, her servant, brings her the news. Theseus has returned in perfect health, not dead. We think of the end of Chopin's Story of an Hour, don't we? To obviously avert Phaedra's death wish and her possible betrayal by Hippolytus, Onan, the servant, will tell her, you need to concoct a story, a lie, around the abandoned sword that was left. Seeing Hippolytus by Theseus' side, Phaedra will grant Onan, fine, do what you've got to do. After his long period of 6 months in captivity, Theseus is surprised when he shows up. No one seems that excited that he is alive, right? From his wife to his son, they're both kind of anxious to conceal the different loves that they have. Not for each other, not necessarily, right? Phaedra is obviously just eaten up by guilt. Hippolytus is kind of anxious to distance himself from his stepmother's advances, but he can't tell his father yet of his love for Erica either. Poor Hippolytus, stuck, no question stuck, as all great tragedies will provide us with a character or protagonist who is stuck and uncertain as to exactly how to act. I mean, obviously we have to think about Shakespeare's Hamlet as a classic example of this. The fourth act will begin with Theseus being told by the servant Onan that Hippolytus has in fact attempted to seduce, sleep with, and rape his wife Phaedra, his stepmother. Theseus is immediately enraged and will banish Hippolytus, and in fact will ask the god Neptune, who has promised to grant any wish to Theseus that he asks, to avenge him by killing his son. Protesting, obviously, his innocence, Hippolytus will disclose, I'm not in love with your wife, my stepmother, but I do have a secret love for Erica, and the father is just blown away. He doesn't know what to believe, and he leaves. Fearing, however, that she might be guilty for Hippolytus' death, Phaedra now makes up her mind, you know what, I'm going to actually tell the truth. And then she's on her way to tell the truth when she discovers that Hippolytus is in love with Erica. And that jilted lover thing now is going to take over for Phaedra. She cannot believe that Hippolytus is in love with Erica, this girl, instead of being in love with her, the queen. And now all of a sudden jealousy takes over. And at the moment, that's of course the most powerful moment in the play, she refuses to defend Hippolytus, and she leaves the father's curse to obviously run its distance, its course. Finally, when Onan tries to somehow make a little bit light of Phaedra's illicit love, Phaedra, in a towering rage, will accuse her of being a poisonous, scheming monster and banishes her from her presence. So you have this challenge of acting out in powerful emotions and then ultimately the ripple effects. The fifth act will open with Hippolytus taking his leave of Erica, promising her to marry her in a temple outside of Troja. And Theseus, watching this happening, begins to have doubt about his son's guilt in regards to Phaedra. He decides one more time to question the servant, but it's too late. Onan has in fact killed herself by drowning in the waves, and then the messenger will bring news of Hippolytus' death. Hippolytus was departing. His chariot was interrupted by this horrific horned monster rising from the waves, mortally wounding Hippolytus, right? The horses driving through their craziness, pulling the son, Hippolytus. The chariot smashed against the rocks, and then the master kind of dragged to his death. Tragic. In the closing scene, Phaedra is now calm. She'll appear before Theseus. She confesses her guilt and confirms Hippolytus' innocence. So not unlike Creon and his son Haemon at the conclusion of the play Antigone, right? Theseus gets to live. This amazing hero, Theseus, gets to live then with this knowledge. And finally, she will succumb to the effects of self-administered draught of poison, and so she kills herself. Right? In an act of atonement and in respect for his son's parting promise, Theseus pardons Erica and adopts her as his daughter. So there is a bit of harmony at the conclusion of this really dark tragedy. So that's the play. Let's work now at level 2. Our big 5. Epistemologically, what can we know? What can we learn about knowledge from a play like this? Well, it's clear. This play very much is about beware the absolutist position. Theseus, beware, absolutely assuming what is right. We immediately think of Othello, right, who is absolutely convinced that Desdemona is at fault, doesn't pursue the investigation well, tragedy at the end of the play. Same happening here. That is to say, the fallibilist position is a whole lot better position to take, epistemologically speaking, than the absolutist position. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong, and I'm going to investigate a little bit more. Ontologically, what does this text say? Well, we're creatures. This text suggests we're creatures that are born to suffer, but our suffering is often of our own making, and therefore even more tragic. Psychologically, this text talks about the power of jealousy and the power of self-doubt, right? We think that maybe something is wrong with us, and so we begin to act in emotionally powerful ways, and of course it leads to our downfall. Sociologically, well, no rules in love and war, and this dynamic, of course, between father and son is a powerful one, no question. Finally, theodicy-wise, why does bad stuff happen? This play is obviously playing off of the ancient Greek question, which is the question in the opening lines of the Odyssey, as we've lectured elsewhere at learnstrong.net. The question of why is there pain and suffering in the world, and why do gods allow it? Or in the case, of course, of here Racine, why does God allow this kind of pain to happen? Two observations here. We do have pain and suffering in the world, but it's of our own creation often, and our own misgivings, and to that degree, we should learn from our pain as best we can. At 2a, messages here, obviously, love is powerful. No question, this is a clear message. Love is powerful, but powerful for both ill as well as for good. At 2b, the rhetorical level, so many things we could say about this text, but the ironies obviously abound. The dark ironies abound. You have to be careful what you say, because sometimes things end up tragic. And of course, Theseus has to live with the fact that he calls on Neptune to curse and kill his son. And then when he's changed his mind, it's too late. At 3a, well, obviously, we've already said it, the ancient tradition of the Greeks, from Euripides' Hippolytus. We mentioned Medea. Medea obviously is a powerful play in this regards as well. We've given lectures on these other titles. At 3b, finally, how about this one? What was a time when you let jealousy hurt you? Or what was a time when you were hurt by jealousy? Somebody else maybe was jealous of you, and caused you pain. Well, there you go, an introduction to Racine's classic. I hope that this conversation will lead you to both read and to view. What a great play. Thank you.